Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be recommending you a couple of books and series to read if you like Red Rising. Now, I'm very kind of lukewarm on Red Rising. I know it's a very beloved series in the booktube community. So I wanted to recommend a couple of series that I have read that I think if you like Red Rising or aspects of Red Rising that you would also really enjoy. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. I think I have 4 to recommend. So yeah, let's get started. So the first one that I'm going to recommend is an oldie but a goodie, but I think it's worth mentioning because I think it does certain things better than Red Rising, and that is Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson. This is a trilogy and it is a book following our main character Vin as she basically joins the revolution. And they're trying to defeat the enemy after the enemy has already won. The villain has already won at the start of this book, and there are people trying to kind of come to terms with that and try to fight against the system. So there's a lot of exploration around like revolution, around rebellion, about also not just revolting, but also using political means to break down the system from within. There's a lot of really interesting discussion around like class and how different powers that be try to keep the system in place because it ultimately benefits them over the majority of people. There's a very clear delineation between the people who are at the top of the society and then everybody else who is suffering as a result of those few people at the top. There is also a particularly segregated class of people called the Scar, and they are essentially like third-class citizens. They have no rights. They really have no representation in any aspect of life. And Vin is essentially one of the Scar, and she joins the rebellion. She's working with people to try to dismantle the system. And I really like this series because I think it approaches it in a way that isn't just about, you know, physically rebelling, like holding protests, refusing to work. It's also about like how to unravel the system from within. There is an element of the politics, how you have to break down the political systems and rebuild those political systems to really create something that is much more equal for all. There's also a really, really compelling cast of characters, in my opinion, in these books. I'm quite critical of Brandon Sanderson in general. I don't like a lot of his books, but I have to say Mistborn Era 1, I think stands up the test of time. I'm planning to do a reread of it next year, and I'll probably do a deep dive into each book, but I have read passages from there even since I finished the books, and I do find that it addresses the same kind of thematic work as Red Rising in a way that's very delicate but also very realistic. You know, you can't just expect a revolt and that's it. You also have to think about the aftermath of revolution. Like, how do you actually build these systems from the ground up so that they're positioned in a way that benefits the majority of people and not just the select few? It's fantastic. If you've not read it and you've read Red Rising and you like it, you absolutely must because it's so good. The magic system is also super compelling. So if you like magic systems that are, you know, quite intriguing and we're like learning the limits of the magic system along with the characters, then this is also one that I think you'd really, really enjoy. It's a metal-based magic system. Like, how cool is that? It's very, very good. Strongly recommend picking it up if you haven't read it yet and you like Red Rising. The next series that I'm going to recommend, but please bear in mind with this one, only 2 books are out. The 3rd book is yet to be written and released. But that shouldn't stop you from reading it because it is truly, truly an excellent series. And I see nobody talking about it, which is criminal. And that is the Kingdom trilogy by Bethany Jacobs, with the 1st book being These Burning Stars. This series so far is just absolutely, absolutely fantastic. We have commonalities between Red Rising and These Burning Stars in the sense that we have, again, another group of deeply marginalized people who are, again, villainized. Their culture is being eroded in real time and they don't have rights and access to the same opportunities as the rest of society. You know, this one's a bit more interesting because 90% of people in this world are generally okay. I mean, they're still impacted by what's happening, but there is a particular group of people who are villainized and who are portrayed in a way that's so negative, and there isn't actually a true reflection of those people. And they're like maybe 5% or 10% of the entire population. So it's a much smaller group of people being impacted, but that also has much broader consequences on the world. And whilst there is a lot of thematic exploration around like revolution and burning down systems, there is also like a really kind of key aspect of the series so far, which is this kind of cat and mouse revenge tale. And what's really interesting about this cat and mouse revenge tale is that it's not just about these 2 people who have this, you know, hatred for each other. Their hatred for each other is reflective of the broader system. It's almost like a direct consequence of what is happening in the broader world. And I think that's what makes this series so interesting is that whilst we have this broader issue playing out in real time, we also see how characters are not only impacted by the events of what's happening in this broader world, but also how they internalize that and how that changes them throughout the course of the 2 books that are written. It is phenomenal. Like, it is phenomenal, this series so far. And it, like I said, it's criminal how underrated it is. It really tackles these themes in a very intimate way, whilst also not forgetting that there is this broader problem, this broader systemic problem that is leading to a whole bunch of people, a whole race of people being treated in a way that is really disgusting and dehumanizing. The next one I'm going to recommend is a bit of a booktube darling, and deservedly so, and that is the Hierarchy series by James Islington. Again, with this book, only the first book is out, but you can definitely read the first book as a standalone. There are some cliffhangers, but I would say it's pretty complete though. Like, I'm dying to know what happens in the next book, but there are a lot of things that are resolved in book 1 as well. This book is amazing. Like, this is very much like a school setting. There is a very much a competition aspect where people are kind of like fighting for their role in the future society, which is super interesting. There is also very much a very clear hierarchy in the society. The magic system is also based on hierarchy. So there are, again, like the top 1%, and the majority of the magic, which is called the will, is basically funneled up to these people from everybody else. So everybody who has the will, you know, has magic, but that power is being funneled up to the top 1% of this population. It is so well written, this book. It's so addictive to read. I have to say, I think all of these books that I talk about on this list are super addictive to read. But again, we're getting at the start of book 1, there's a lot of unhappy people, and people are no longer willing to put up with the system as it currently stands because it's broken. It's broken for the majority of the people, and people are starting to, you know, there's murmurings, and people are starting to think about how they can upend the system in a way that benefits everybody, not just that top 1%. So as you can see, there's a lot of commonalities thematically with Red Rising, and we do also have that kind of competition aspect as well that adds an extra layer of depth. We also have a really compelling character in our main character, who I have to say is quite similar to Darrow in Red Rising. I actually think he's more compelling though, because I don't want to give too much because I don't want to spoil it, but his origins make him a particularly interesting character that is quite different to series and books that are written with similar thematic work. This to me is probably the closest to Red Rising, and this to me is significantly better than Red Rising. I also think it's better written. I think the characters are more compelling, and I'm just so excited to see where the series goes. Do not sleep on it. Please do not sleep on it. If you like Red Rising and you love like the thematic work, but also the character types and like the plot direction, then you are going to love The Will of the Many by James Islington. And then the final book that I'm going to mention, and I have to mention this one because I just think it's so good. And I think because it's YA, at least in my circle of booktube, it doesn't get talked about that much. So I'm going to big it up a bit. And that is The Ember Quartet by Sabaa Tahir, with the first book being An Ember in the Ashes. This is so good. It is YA, like I said, but again, you are looking at very similar thematic work around revolution, around, you know, people, the majority of people being very unhappy with the status quo. The status quo being that there is a certain group of people at the top of society who get an insane amount of benefits and wealth, generally at the cost of everybody else. They're not treated in the same way as that top, you know, threshold of people. They are seen almost as secondary class citizens. They don't have the same rights. They don't have the same ability to be able to dream in the way that those people do at the top. So this is a really fantastic one because our characters are younger, but they approach it with a kind of a sense of youth that I find quite interesting compared to some of the other books that I've listed on this list, where some of the characters are a bit older. I do think it's quite interesting to read it from a younger perspective as well, because I think the characters kind of rationalize it differently to say if you're reading a book like this from the perspective of an adult. A lot of these books that I've talked about have young adults, but the content of the books are much more adult, if that makes sense. Like the thematic exploration and the other characters that we follow or get exposure to tend to have much more mature perspectives on what's happening in the world. And while that is somewhat true of an Ember in the Ashes, the perspectives that we follow, they're all young adults. They're all people who are not only get through school, but also having to come to terms with certain realizations about the society that they live in. Every single one of these series has some element of people realizing what is actually happening and then wanting to upend that, and then wanting to, figure out what does the future actually look like outside of this, which I think are all elements that are present in the Red Rising world, not just that initial trilogy, but the books that follow on from that as well. So if you like Red Rising and you've not read any of these series, you have to pick them up, because I have to say, I think every single one of these series is better than Red Rising, in my humble opinion, of course. I am not the biggest fan of Red Rising. I do think there's certain things that are okay about it, but I think it's very overhyped personally, and I think all of these series that I've talked about are much better written, have much more compelling characters, and also approach the thematic work in a much more nuanced way. So those are my 4 recommendations. I actually have more, but I will probably leave those to another video, and I might approach that video in a slightly different way. But this is specifically for you folks who love Red Rising. So I hope you consider reading any of these series. Let me know down below if there's any other series that you would recommend to folks who love Red Rising and like that thematic work, like the character types, because I'm sure we're all always looking for books and series that follow that kind of formula, because it's always going to be interesting, because unfortunately humans will always do shit things and it will never ever end. And it's always interesting to read. So there we have it. Thanks for watching, folks. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, and I look forward to talking to you about other recommendations in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.